Welcome back, maggots. Today, I have a story of a utopia that's not that perfect. A terrible encounter for a jogger in a park. And a horrible tale of 3 teens searching for a beast in the woods. Welcome to the Frail Blaze. This story is called Left-Brained, Right-Brained. On my brother's 17th birthday, we went to the government center to take his exam. How unlucky. A test on his birthday, and not even at school. That's when my parents sat me down. My father did all the talking. Do you know why your brother is taking this test? No, I responded. It is the most important day of his life. This test will determine who he will be. Long ago, our founders realized that the 2 parts of man are in constant conflict, the logical and the emotional. So your brother will take the exam and determine which side he is more of, logical or emotional. Whichever wins, they will perform a surgery to stunt the other side of the brain, so his winning side can grow to its full potential. You see, son, I am logical, and your mother is emotional. Together we form a balance. That balance is the key to our society. When my brother returned home, his head was all bandaged up. My mother sang and brought out the cake, but he seemed like he wasn't all there. I went to give him a hug, but he pushed me away. My father grabbed his results and read them aloud. Logical. My brother was never the same after that. Not the brother who I used to roughhouse with, get into mischief with. He was now like a zombie. My father said that would fade, but it never did. Soon, a year passed. Now it was my 17th birthday. Even though the exam seemed rather easy, I was terrified. As I waited with all the other 17-year-olds, the adjudicator came to me and told me to go home. But what about go now, they said. When I got home, my mother was quick to hug me and show me the cake that she had made. My father interrogated me. Why no bandages? What were your results? I said they told me to leave and that I wasn't feeling very good. I went to my room to lie down when I heard a knock on the door. I hid by the top of the staircase as 2 soldiers entered with the adjudicator. My mother began crying. My father took the results from them and said, "Perfect in both." "He has to come with us," the soldiers said. "I'm afraid this will be the last time you will see him." My father simply accepted it. My mother begged them to at least let her say goodbye. I ran into my brother's room. He had a window. I could jump out onto the garage and then down to the ground below. I wasn't about to be taken. "Where are your bandages?" he asked as I entered. "I gotta get out of here. They're gonna take me." "Who?" he asked. "Soldiers," I said, trying to get to the window. "You are a duel?" "There's no use running." He grabbed me, and he yelled for the soldiers. The old brother I knew would never betray me like that. I kicked and screamed even as the soldiers manhandled me into the back of their black SUV. They said I'll never see my family again. They said nothing else. I don't know what will happen now. Am I going to be executed? Well then, that one Invented a world rather quickly. Well done. An almost impossible situation to get out of once you're already into it, though. Seems strange that they would make it to 16 without knowing about this test at 17 years of age, but let me know what you thought in the comments. I suppose, where this is called 3 stories, I'll give you 2 more, but not that you deserve anything. Alright. Well, this next story, then, is called Night Run. Nice title. I was tying up my shoes when the first notification came in. Serial killer still on the loose. 3rd body recovered while police is hunting for evidence. We advise you to stay indoors and avoid isolated locations. Panic seared through my body. My night jogging was the norm, and I didn't want to change that up. It seems like it could be a good idea, but runner's gonna run. I took all necessary precautions as to not be a target. Black clothes, my hair tied up so that it can't be grabbed, and good running shoes so that I can avoid all threats. I started on my normal path in the woods, which usually was deserted by the time I was out, apart from the random fellow runner or homeless people, but lately they all seemed to be avoiding the area, which was concerning. Halfway through, I started hearing footsteps close by, and my heart picked up pace. I could not determine how far the other person was, but the distance between us was closing. My breathing got faster and faster as I tried to pinpoint the location of the stranger. I strayed from my path and got further into the woods, trying to stay undetected. I really need to stop doing this, I muttered to myself as I was still looking around in the dark, trying to guess which shadow belonged to the trees and which one was him. Suddenly, we came face to face, and my stress reached uncharted levels. Barely a whisper managed to escape my lips before the screaming started. I was able to escape the struggle with minimum scratches and a small amount of bleeding. I ran as fast as I could, but it still took me over an hour to get home. I got through the door breathless while the sun had just started to rise. It took me hours to calm myself, and I only breathed a sigh of relief once the second notification came in. 4th body recovered. Police have reached a dead end. No evidence has been found to identify the killer. I was safe. I can't say I didn't have a small inkling of the twist in that one beforehand, but pretty good nonetheless. Just goes to show, whether you are the killer themselves or the victim, one should really listen to notifications of danger like that. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And I suppose, since you've been sitting there being all nice and whatever, I'll give you your 3rd story immediately. This one's slightly longer than the others, but hey, you're here for it. This one is called It Hides Among the Trees. I like that title. The smell of decay is a unique one. It's unlike anything else you'll ever experience. It's a smell that you can't wash away from a crime scene. It's a smell that sticks with you if you're ever unlucky enough to experience it. It triggers a fearful instinct in some, morbid curiosity in others, and for some sadomasochistic individuals, a little bit of both. It could be a body, an animal, a human, maybe something else. It could be roadkill or a murder scene. Could be relatively fresh or nearly mummified. And in some local legend, It's the smell that marks doom for any soul damned to such a fate. My name is not important, for I fear how telling this story will make me sound, well, absolutely insane, and frankly, I don't want that linked to me. But for the sake of introductions, I'll take up the pseudonym Ethan. This story takes place when I was only 17 and about to graduate high school. Scariest of all. By now, I'm 23. I have moved, partially based on the following events, and have finished college. I've started working as a crime scene investigator. A recent case brought this memory to the forefront of my mind, and I realized that I never got the chance to tell anyone back when it first happened. I was admittedly afraid of getting into serious trouble. I still am, but that's what's good about the anonymity of the internet, right? And I guess that traumatized part of me still hopes that somebody from the area or surroundings has had this experience with it, or at the very least can believe me. That's all it can really be described as, unless of course you're from the area and you know it by name. The Faranock. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm from Illinois, specifically Sycamore County. Go Coyotes, right? Well, in my teenage years, I've seen my fair share of crazy shit. And if I were here for this, I could go on for hours about my experiences. But one in particular rises above the rest, and that's the one that I want to talk about. Growing up, I never really had much stability. I was the oldest of 3 siblings, raised by a single mother who passed away when I was just 8. My little siblings were 5 and 3. We were put into custody of our aunt, who never really was around that much. I found myself, more than her, being the one helping to make ends meet, at least as far as my siblings were concerned. My only real escape from that responsibility was school, and in junior high to high school, I spent any chance I could with my friends. We were a pretty wild pack back then, at least compared to how I've since turned out. We often explored abandoned buildings, spray-painted trains, vandalized police cars. You know, teenager stuff. And being annoying nuisances of kids, we not only got into trouble, but we did the typical kid thing of spreading spooky urban legends as if they were true rumors. And for a while, that's all I thought the Faranock was. It's been a tall tale for as long as I can remember. Even as a little kid, I distinctly remember even hearing adults talking about it. No doubt, the stories had a profound impact on the local culture. You rarely saw anyone out after the streetlights had come on, especially not in the area I lived in, which was thoroughly surrounded by woodlands. Not really rural, but there were a good few hunting districts in the area because of the little mini patches of woods that made up a good part of the scenery. Some were hiking trails, and the biggest of them was a huge park, and the rest were hunting ranges and just nothing at all. If you did see people out after the sun began to set, you would never see them alone. At the very least, they'd always have at least one person with them, usually clinging to each other for dear life. For us, this was our Mothman. Everyone and their mother's dog had a story about the Faranock. This was such a prominent thing in our local culture that the curfew in place was specifically designed in consideration to this threat. It was a creature that thrived off of fear. It uses humans' natural, curious nature to lure them in, string them along an increasingly more morbid trail of sights until their fear was so intense that it could strike and feed. I'm getting a bit low on light here. so that it could strike and feed. And make no mistake, this creature was ruthless. Easy to survive if you were smart enough to just not act on your curiosity, but if you weren't, as long as you had the foresight to quit investigating while you were ahead, you might be okay. After all, the creature fed off of fear. If you didn't give in to this bait, it wouldn't mangle and devour whatever was left of you when it was done. Like the beast. And the way it lured people in was the fabricated scent of decay and the expertly timed rustling of bushes or tree leaves to get your attention and get you in on its macabre trail and lead you right into the belly of the literal beast. Of course, this was a tale so absurd. Why would a group of angsty teens ever heed any warning? Why would they follow the curfew inspired by a presumably faux threat that there was too much opportunity to mess around when no one was outside and had eyes on you? Not even police got out after curfew because of the beast. Well, as you may have guessed, my friends and I were angsty teens who thought we were too good to listen to the stories and follow the curfew. Rebellious angsty teens in a horror story. This can't end well. It was a Friday in October, nearing the end of the month, at the peak of fall, with winter rearing its ugly head just around the corner. My friends, who, for the sake of this story, we'll call Spencer and Adam, and I, were hanging out after school. We always hung out in a small cafe down the road from the school until it closed at 6, and we were ultimately shooed off. It was the weekend, and we didn't feel like calling it a day just yet. Spencer was itching for trouble, as he had just recently gotten ungrounded, and he wanted to make up for lost time. Naturally, Adam and I were on board. Why wouldn't we be? There was nothing else to do after all. So we hopped on our bikes and rode around town doing what we always did, looking for creepy or otherwise unsettling shit to stick our noses into and vandalize whatever we felt like on the way. Eventually the sun had set, and it was a little past 8 o'clock, meaning curfew had already been enacted. Of course, the police only patrolled until 8:15, and after that it was free reign for us. You know, there's one thing we haven't done before, Adam suggested as we biked to the park. Spencer and I both looked at him when I piped up with, "What, murder someone?" The question was meant sarcastically, and they both knew that. And Adam snorted in amusement. "No," he said. "We haven't explored the woods at night. We're already biking to the park. There's a hiking trail right there." Meaning, the expectant trail off caused Spencer to light up with excitement, already knowing what was being suggested. "Oh shit. We haven't looked for that, what was it called? The thing that eats people by luring them into the woods with dead smell or whatever. Ethan, you know what it is, don't you?" he asked, glancing over at me. Before I could answer, Adam chimed in enthusiastically. "Faranock. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." And I nodded in agreement. "Right, well, what's stopping us? I have my phone, and it's nearly fully charged, so at the very least we have a flashlight and a way to call for help if the boogeyman comes out of the trees to come get us." This caused us all to laugh. For some reason, we found it hilarious to poke fun at the whole thing. Well, no, I guess it wasn't just for no reason. It was because we were teenagers. Going against the status quo was just what we did. Now, they're very adamant on the foolish teenager angle on this one. As we made it to the park and biked through until we had made it to the trail, I distinctly remember all three of us agreeing to split up. Always a wonderful idea in every story I've ever read. I can't exactly remember how that part of the conversation went, but we made good on our word, and we did just that. We split up when we got there. Nothing says an evening with friends like not being with your friends. But I'll just read. We made it to the trail, climbed off our bikes, and let them fall to the ground in a careless pile, so excited at the prospect of exploring a new territory. We were the very thing the Faranok preyed on, curious humans who acted a lot tougher than they were. It didn't help that we were stupid kids at the time, and all self-preservation was overshadowed by the adrenaline rush of exploring the woods at night after being fed what to us was like the equivalent of a campfire ghost tale. We looked at each other, me pulling up my phone for light. Spencer glanced down and laughed. I think I'm going to traverse along the trail until something happens. I've got my phone, but the trail has a few scattered lights here and there, so I'll be fine. It'll save battery, he said. Adam and I looked at each other and nodded. Okay, cool. I guess we'll just explore either side of the woods then. I suggested to Adam, and he just shrugged. Fine by me, he responded. That was when we split up. As stupid as it was, sure, at the time we thought it was all a folk tale. But even if it had been, splitting up was still stupid. There were animals in the woods that could easily hurt us. And I guess we thought we were big and bad because we had our phones. But I really can't say I remember what was going through my head at that point in time. So I set off into the woods, my phone's flashlight sweeping the area around me. The only sound I had being the ambience of the wind gently blowing through the leaves of the trees and bushes around me, and the chirping crickets, or cicadas. I'd be lying to say I could tell the difference. I still can't. For a while, nothing happened. I walked through the woods, phone in hand, looking for anything interesting. The most notable thing I found up to that point was a cigarette carton with 2 unsmoked but broken cigarettes in it, and someone's old frisbee. It was sun-bleached and weathered, so I could tell it had been there for quite some time. After about 20 minutes of absolutely nothing, I decided this was boring, and I was getting pretty cold. I was ready to call it a night and to go home. But then, as I went to call Spencer, I smelled it. A foul stench of decay singeing my nose, bringing tears to my eyes. It was such a flooring smell, something that at that time I had never smelled before, and it was horrendous. There's truly been nothing else in my life that compared to it. Ironically, though, despite the Faranok being the whole reason I was in the woods in the first place, that wasn't my first thought. My first thought was that I was bored, and I want to get pictures of what I presumed to be a carcass. Yeah, as morbid as it was, that was my thinking process. At the time, all I could think about was how gnarly it would be to have a photo of whatever this might be. I knew I could get into some serious trouble, but I didn't care. I was a nosy 17-year-old. All that mattered to me was the shock value. So, despite my growing repulsion and feeling nausea churning in my stomach, I followed the horrid scent. I tried calling Spencer for real this time, but he didn't pick up. I just assumed he either had his ringer off or was being too brave to answer his phone, wanting to feel as alone as possible on his adventure. That might seem like a stretch, but that's just how he was. So at first, it didn't really bother me that much that he didn't answer. It was when I started hearing what sounded like the rustling of something in the bushes around me, something big, that I actually remembered why I was there, and then I hesitated to keep going. Unfortunately, whatever sense that had come through to the surface for long enough for me to hesitate was overpowered by my stubborn curiosity. So I trekked on. And it was not pleasant when I did. The first thing I saw was a small animal skull that was almost completely cleaned, but the bone was still stained red from blood. I thought about picking it up and taking it with me, but for some reason I just didn't. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe whatever was possessing me to be so reckless back then decided to sit this one out. It was probably for the best. I kept going, and there were even more animal bones. Eventually, entire animal carcasses. Way too many to be right, though. Too many to be normal. They were all decaying, covered in filth and maggots, and the stench was absolutely terrible. So terrible that I didn't even bother to stop and take any pictures. I was already nearly overwhelmed by the initial smell of decay I was following that was getting stronger. I didn't need more. And as I continued, the trail of death just kept getting worse. Eventually, when I started seeing more, bigger bones, I knew they weren't from any animal. Not only were they too big, but no animal has a human skull or hands. When I saw that human skull, my heart sank. I knew I'd made a terrible misjudgment. Before I could call Spencer or Adam, I heard the rustling again. The smell of decay was now so strong. I knew that if I went even one step further, I was a goner. As I went to shine my flashlight over the rustling bushes, it flickered and went off. Shit, I murmured, checking to see if I had it turned on. I did. It just wasn't working. I was too scared to input my phone's password, and with trembling hands, that's when I saw it. Two piercing red eyes staring at me from the darkness. And they were rising. First, to my eye level, which was 5'11" at the time, so that was already impressive for some beast or unknown animal in the woods. But then, it went beyond. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. My heart practically leapt into my throat when I saw a full mouth of rows of sharp, long, yellow, glinting teeth in the subtle moonlight. As my eyes adjusted to having no flashlight, I saw its face. It was horrible. I can't even properly describe it in words. Its head was long and its mouth protruded in a way it shouldn't have. Its red eyes were sunken in, and its face was thin and hollow. Its skin was so pale it was almost white, and it probably would have been if it weren't for the dirty, dingy, gray hue that it had over top of it. This was the Pharaoh. It was a thin, lanky, grotesque being, and suddenly it made so much sense how it thrived off of fear. And how could anyone not be afraid of it? Instinct kicked in, and I bolted off running back the way I had come. I didn't exactly memorize the path, but I didn't care. I told myself that I'd keep running until I made it out. And I did. I ran and didn't turn around even for a second. I'm glad I didn't, because I could hear its heavy, fast footsteps. It sounded like it was on all fours, which was even more disturbing when I inevitably painted a mental image of it. Maybe that was a good thing, though, because I ran even faster, fearing for my life. Faster than I've ever run, ever before or since. I could hear its heavy, strained panting and its menacing growl for a long time as I ran. I was easily running for longer than 15 minutes before the noises stopped. I didn't care that they had. I had to get out of there. I kept running and running and running, and I didn't turn around until I finally emerged by the road leading to the park entrance. My phone's flashlight had come back on, and I hadn't even realized it until I stopped running. Once I was out of the woods, I finally turned around. I had expected to still see the beast, but I didn't. I was undeniably relieved. Quite lucky for stories like these. Quickly, and still trembling, I tried to call Spencer and Adam, but neither of them picked up. I had to have tried calling for a total of 40 times, but no one ever answered. Although I didn't have any solid proof, deep down, I knew what had happened. There was no denying it. I knew I needed to get home. So, staying along the illuminated path, I made my way back to the park where my bike was laying. And I picked it up. As I leaned up with it, something just told me that I needed to look up right then. And I'll never forget what I saw. Adam's mangled corpse was barely visible on the outskirts of the side of the woods he had gone into. It was clear he tried to run, but he didn't make it. The sight was so disturbing that I dropped my bike and doubled over, vomiting. His body was covered in what was easily all his own blood. His limbs were dislocated and bent at unnatural angles. His flesh was torn right through in many spots, and his clothes were shredded to rags. I never saw or heard from Spencer after that night, but I knew that he must have suffered a fate similar to Adam's, and it made me sick to think about it. It still does. When I could breathe again, I quickly hopped on my bike and rode back to my aunt's house. She, thankfully, wasn't home until much later, so I never had to explain to her where I was all night. I never told anyone what happened to Spencer or Adam, or even myself that night. There were a lot of reasons behind that, but the main one was fear. From that day forward, I was never sticking my nose where it didn't belong. I learned a lot of things that night, a lot of things I shouldn't have. The Faranok was much more than a tall tale. It really was a very serious threat. While all of the stories might not have been true, I knew what happened to me that night, and my friends. I know when the missing posters went up. I know how torn apart the community was. I know what happened to me, and I know what happened to my best friends, and I never doubted when people warned me after that about anything. Whatever warning I was ever given, I made sure to heed them. No part of me could relive those events. I moved out as soon as I turned 18. I moved far away, and I never looked back. I got accepted into a college in Michigan, and I focused on my career. I buried myself in my work so I never had to remember what happened on that horrible night in October. I made a new life, and for a while, I thought I got away from it. I got a new job. I got a girlfriend who I'm planning to propose to this summer, and she's due to have our first child in a few months. But when I got called to a scene a few miles from where I'd been staying, the state of the body was something no one was expecting. No one except me. It was a teenager, about my age at the time of the incident, and her corpse was brutalized in the same horrible way that Adam's had been. The fact that her body had been found in the woods behind her family home made one thing all too clear to me. I was never supposed to get away from the Farinok that night. It followed me here. What a fascinating beast. Let me know what you thought of this story, or if you know of any other stories you'd like me to read, in the comments below. Oh, and subscribe already. I do hope that you'll join me in the future for more Frail Blaze tales.